everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Andrea and today I thought I would share with you my top 10 favorite author biopics. In all honesty, I get very protective over some of my favorite authors. So for example, Emily Dickinson, Sylvia Plath, Tolkien. I'm never really content with the biopic because they don't reflect my ideas of them. I put them in the order of how many times I've watched them. Number 10, Kill Your Darlings. This is the first movie that I've seen Daniel Radcliffe in. I think in this role he really matured where he portrays Allen Ginsberg and you get to see like New York and the poets and Jack Kerouac is there and all of the beats. It was so well done. And I loved the kind of overlay of poetry and scenery and everything to do with that darker side of New York City. I really enjoyed this movie. I would highly recommend if you like Allen Ginsberg. Number 9, Capote. So in this movie you have Philip Seymour Hoffman playing Capote, and this is while he's working on his novel In Cold Blood. Well, it's not really a novel, it's non-fiction. It's one of the first crime non-fictions, I guess. It was highly sensationalized. I don't need to tell you, you will probably know about it, but in this movie we kind of get to see how he develops this very close relationship to the murderer of the case he's investigating. And there's a lot of speculation of what that relationship might have been, and he carries out this friendship all the way to the end where he watches, well, I'm not gonna spoil it, but it's very dark. And I think for this reason I haven't watched it more than maybe 3 or 4 times, but it's definitely in the top 10. It's so memorable. Number 8, Quills. So this is a movie that's kind of a very loose adaptation of someone's idea of what it would have been like to be around the Marquis de Sade. So in this movie, he's played by Geoffrey Rush, and he's actually on sort of a house arrest in a church. And everyone else in this movie includes Kate Winslet, Joaquin Phoenix. Literally everyone in this movie has an Oscar, okay? So you get to see them in this movie kind of earlier in their careers, starting out for the other two, but you get the sense of the chills and the tension, the dangers of certain kinds of writing. It's both like dark and perverse, but also historical in some way. I thought it was excellent, and it is, of course, a very loose idea of what it might have been like, but I thought the movie, for what it was, it did a pretty good job. Number 7 was The Last Station. So Christopher Plummer plays Tolstoy, and Helen Mirren plays his wife. And in this movie, we get to see kind of the last days of Tolstoy. It focuses only on a very specific portion of Tolstoy's life, the very end, but it also kind of highlights some of the issues around Tolstoy in general, both good and bad. So for one, you know, he became a lot more socialist in many ways, and he was all about sharing his artwork and his money with people and enhancing culture and being accessible to all. But at the same time, he was taking away from his own wife and his own family. And his wife kind of viewed them as a couple working on his works together. She was the one who kind of hand wrote War and Peace like 5 times because no one else could read his handwriting. We find that she was part of the process of like writing Anna Karenina and giving him advice on so many things. So for her, like, she was this harsh critic and a harsh editor of his work, and they collaborated on these things together, and she was a very big help to him. And yet other people, including the sort of cult around Tolstoy at the time, was just kind of viewing him as this incredible person. And in this movie we get to see this dynamic really play out. Number 6, To Walk Invisible. So this is a 2-part biopic, I guess. It is a biopic because it's not a documentary. Even though it has a sort of BBC documentary feel, it's actually played out by actresses. So this is about the Bronte sisters. I have spoken about it recently when I was doing my Victober vlogs. I have watched this multiple times. I really enjoyed the way it drops you into the Victorian period, but it also kind of shows you like their dynamics as sisters, being in the same house all of the time, dealing with little issues on top of bigger ones, like, you know, getting published. And it also tries to highlight their personalities, like Charlotte, the super ambitious one, and Emily, the accidental genius, and Anne, the sensitive one, but the one who kind of gets along with everyone in the family and no one could hate her. For me, the scenery seems to be everything in most of these. It's just, it kind of drops you in a time and place, and I think that's the successful biopic for me. It's giving you context in a very nice, atmospheric way, and at the same time really highlighting the best qualities in an author's character, and I think this one does a great job. Number 5, so this is a weird one, but it's Becoming Jane. I have found myself watching this movie so many times, and it's with Anne Hathaway, who has a horrible English accent in this movie and in others, and her male counterpart is played by James McAvoy. This movie tried to present Jane Austen's life as an identical parallel to Pride and Prejudice. And by doing so, it has failed so many hardcore Jane Austen fans. I can totally understand why, if you love Jane Austen, you will absolutely loathe this movie. I think it presents her as somewhat weaker and needier and a hopeless romantic than she actually was. And I think it takes away from a lot of her humor and her snappiness. But like I said, I think even with this movie, for me, it was just kind of the scenery, seeing her in her house, you know. I just like seeing people live their life. I know it sounds weird, but like just watching her go to church with her father and chilling around the house, or reading a book in the window, or scribbling down on a piece of paper, seeing what people did for fun. There are some scenes where they go to like carnivals outside or something, and it's just kind of nice to get an idea of what people's lives were like, what life looked like before the internet, before technology, especially in the country and not in the main cities. Number 4, The End of the Tour. So this is a biopic of David Foster Wallace, and it features Jason Segel as David Foster Wallace and Jesse Eisenberg as David Lipsky. So The End of the Tour is an adaptation of David Lipsky's book, which was transcription of various recordings he had that he took from being with David Foster Wallace in the last 3 days of the Infinite Jest Tour. I know that's a handful, but if you know this, it kind of all makes sense. So in this movie, we have Jesse Eisenberg's David Lipsky kind of being introduced to David Foster Wallace, and he just like loves him so much. He's such a big fan, and he's just ecstatic that he gets to spend these 3 days with him. I don't know what the budget was for this film, but it was just scenes of them talking. The whole movie is just 2 guys talking, and I loved it. I thought it was great. I think if you read a lot of David Foster Wallace and you get to watch a lot of the interviews with him, there's some on YouTube, you'll get the chance to see that that is his tone, that is his voice. And this movie did a great job in kind of adapting his voice and style, but also kind of adapting it to Lipsky's book and his take and his interpretation. I thought it was great and I enjoyed it. I think this was one of those few movies that I actually looked forward to actively for it to come out, and when it did, I was like the first one in the theater. I liked it. So number 3 is actually 2 movies, and this will highlight my high school experience. So I went through a phase where I was absolutely obsessed with George Sand. George Sand is a pen name, once more. When you think about the fact that she was a divorcee with 2 children and then had a 10-year love affair with Alfred de Musset, the poet, and then with Frédéric Chopin. And on top of all that, she wrote like 39 novels, 11 plays, 5 autobiographies. She translated some Shakespeare plays for the theater. She was just so involved in the arts at the time in France, and she dressed in manly clothing, and I just found her so amazing. And I think this is one of those rare cases where I find the author more incredible and her biography in general to be more outstanding than her actual works. So for me, these two biopics meant a lot. So the first one is in French and it's called Les Enfants du Siècle, or Children of the Century, and the film is entirely in French, and she is portrayed by Juliette Binoche, who plays George Sand in such a great way. In this movie, we kind of get to see her as the younger, less experienced person in comparison to Musset. She doesn't have a lot of life experience, and she's being introduced to this whole world of the arts and what it's like to live kind of bohemian lifestyle. And obviously people were not big fans of a woman doing such things at the time, or leaving her husband. And you get to see her kind of be dropped into this realm, and then her on-again, off-again relationship with Musset. And the movie does an excellent job with the setting, the scenery, the atmosphere, and the way like her character is created is wonderful. But the second movie, with Judy Davis playing George Sand, takes a totally different approach, where now she's in a relationship with Chopin, played by Hugh Grant. And here she's the kind of more masculine, more tough kind of George Sand, and she's experienced, she smokes her cigars, and she like picks Chopin out of a crowd. That's mine. In this movie, we're actually introduced to kind of that lifestyle where authors will kind of go to salons and talk about their works and put on plays to entertain each other. So here we have George Sand and Chopin, among other people of their time, like actresses and wealthy people, being entertained at this one mansion and them interacting with each other. And here you see her character be like super tough. Again, I would recommend both of them because they show like these two different sides of George Sand. So number 2 is a biopic I've watched multiple times, definitely over 20, that's for sure. Finding Neverland. I don't know if Johnny Depp should have been the one to play J.M. Barrie. He wasn't someone that anyone would have labeled as super attractive in any way. That aside, I think Johnny Depp does a pretty good job capturing his essence, his childish spirit, and the way he wrote. And here we get to see the way he becomes friends with the Llewellyn Davis family and how he accidentally inherits 4 children. And, you know, their names are George, Peter, Michael, you know, names you wouldn't recognize. And how he was inspired to write Peter Pan. In his biographies, we find that he's actually inspired a lot by some of the events that transpired in his own childhood, with his older brother dying very young age and not growing up. Some people argue that it's also him because he never grew up both physically and in spirit. In this movie, it's only directed at these 4 children, but the way they play with the elements of kind of envisioning Tinkerbell and putting it on stage, and the audience reception to all this and how people thought about it afterwards, I thought it did such a great job. And again, Kate Winslet, Johnny Depp, Dustin Hoffman, so many great actors in this movie. And then that brings us to number 1, which is the biopic I've watched most, which is Miss Potter. And I recently rewatched it and I just remembered how much I love it. I thought the music was great. So the actress Renee Zellweger plays Beatrix Potter. Her husband, who is also her publisher, was played by Obi-Wan, Ewan McGregor. There are many other great actors in this film as well. And here we get to see her experience growing up, falling in love with animals in general, bunnies and squirrels, and painting sceneries, and just creating children's books, which at the time were not a thing. And her being sort of dumped on the youngest brother in this publishing family, and the way she kind of develops this relationship with her publisher. And again, what I loved about this movie was not only the scenery. The scenery is just the land and the trees and all of the nature. I also really liked the way that when she gets an idea, you have small animations in cartoon format Love that. And the third thing that I love was kind of really showing some things that were like social norms that I would have never thought of before. So for example, the day she goes to visit her printer is such a big deal in this movie. And her mother's like, "What? You were at the printer?" Those are my 10 favorite author biopics. Please do let me know what's your favorite author biopic. I mean, going into the holidays, I have so much more time to watch movies now, so definitely let me know what your favorite biopics are. And on that note, I will see you in my next video. Bye!